All right, we're going to take another look at a video from Cross Examined. This one is on errors in the Bible. Apologist Frank Turek. His thoughts on it. I still haven't quite figured out if this is real or not. A lot of these questions seem to be genuine. A lot of them kind of seem like they were definitely scripted or prompted. But we'll just take them at their word that this is a genuine question from a audience member.
How do you account for the errors of the scribes when the New Testament was handed down person to person?
Yeah, excellent question. There are errors that we know about. Why? Because we can compare the documents, we can compare the manuscripts and see where the errors are. In fact, let me see if I can show you a representation of that, because it's better seen than it is described. Here it is. Let's say you have, here's the original, which we don't have. We don't, at least we
Okay. Error number one. At least he admits this. It's great that he would actually admit it, that you don't have the original. So the answer is we can't account. You can account for errors that are done from the earliest manuscripts down to what we have today. There's thousands of different minor discrepancies. Nothing major, but you can never know if you are accounting for the errors from the original. You know if you're accounting for errors from the oldest translations that we have. And I think the oldest book that was put together was 100 years after Jesus died. So that's the best you can get. Now there's older pieces, pages and things like that, but the oldest complete New Testament, the Old Testament, hundreds of years after Jesus died. So you can only get about that good. Maybe 200 years after Jesus died, 100 years after, but there are no originals to compare it to. So you can account for errors from copy to copy to copy to copy over the course of hundreds of years. But it doesn't matter, because if it's not correct to the original writing, then all you're doing is accounting for errors from an error.
We don't think we have any original documents, okay? So they're all copies, okay? And let's say you find 4 different copies. And in the first copy, you see an error right here. And then another copy, there's another error right there. In the third copy, there's another error right there. And in the fourth copy, there's an error right there. Can you reconstruct the original?
Yeah. You know that messed up on one letter, then you can gather that the word was just. So sure.
Yes.
Yes. And that's what scholars do. The original, this happens to be Romans 3:26, God is just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Now the note here is the New Testament documents have far fewer variations than this.
I like how the question at the top of this says, how do we know what the original said? And then blatantly admits that we don't have the original. So everything below these lines, these copy 1, copy 2, copy 3, you can kind of piece together what is said from copy 1 to copy 2, yes. But I don't know if he's trying to make it seem like it goes from copy 0, which is the original, to copy 1 to copy 2. But I mean, it goes from like the original that we don't have to copy 1 to thousands of different. But if you don't know what the original said, all you can know what from copy 1 to copy 2, you can kind of piece together those errors, and from copy 3 to copy 2, you can piece together those errors. But it doesn't matter if you don't know what the original said. And the slide at the top says, how do we know what the original said? Hope he gets to how we would.
This example. So yes, sometimes scribe made mistakes, but in virtually all cases we know what the mistake was and we can correct it by comparing it with other documents. Now, you might say, why wouldn't God just, if this is true, why wouldn't he just maintain the original?
That's a good
I'm
question.
speculating here, but I think one reason, well, two reasons. Number one, if we had the original, we might venerate it. We tend to venerate things like that, right? But number two, if I had the original, what could I do to it? I could alter it, right?
Well, what if God just had the original? Every once in a while, he just popped it back down. There's a million ways around that. What if the original was written in an unalterable ink or unalterable paper of some sort?
But if you had a copy, 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 and I had a copy, and I changed my copy, is everyone going to know who changed their copy? Yeah, because when you get all your copies together and compare it to mine, you go, Turek, you heretic, why'd you do that? Right? So by not preserving the original, you actually are able to preserve the original better.
That's absolutely absurd. Nate, think of one other example where that might be the case, where if you destroy the original of something and don't have any blueprints or any no way to figure out what the original said. Try to imagine if you're trying to reconstruct a building that was long since. Reconstruct a building brick for brick that was destroyed thousands of years ago, and you had no pictures of it. You had no sources to describe what it might have said. Maybe a couple hundred years later, somebody attempted to kind of piece back together something that the building might have looked like, but you wanted to recreate it perfectly. In what case, in what scenario, would destroying the original building preserve the reconstruction of that building or anything else? Pick any example. There's no example to make this work that destroying the original somehow preserves the original. It doesn't preserve the original. It destroys the original. It's destroyed. You can't preserve it.
So what if the error is not that simple? Like, what if it's a difference in concept? So if we have these copies and say copy 1 gets 12 copies, copy 2 gets 24 copies, and then you've got copy 4 that gets 400 copies, but copy 4 is the incorrect copy, then how do we justify truth in that? As well as how do we justify the truth in...
See, this is why I think that these are scripted questions, because she's kind of playing into that that copy 4 is that we have copy 4. So you have the original manuscript, and then we have the second one and the third one and the fourth one. But we don't have the second copy or the third copy or the fourth copy, the fifth copy. We don't know, we wouldn't even be able to, there's no way to tell which copy we might have. Some of these fragments that we've found are pretty old and maybe somewhere similar to the time. Just imagine how many copies you can make in a group of people at that time could make in a day. You could make 3 or 4. Even if you could just make one, you could only make one copy a year, you'd still have 300 copies, and we don't have any of those for sure. So she's kind of playing into this idea that we have the first copy of the original, second copy of the original, but we just don't. You don't.
Jesus' exact words when we didn't hear them ourselves.
Okay, there is no significant doctrine, theological doctrine, that is affected by any variant. And who admits this? Bart Ehrman himself. Okay? So Bart Ehrman, the great skeptic, admits that the New Testament documents are reliable. In fact,
Sure. You see what I mean? Like this is supposed to be a random question, but he just has this already. Maybe he was expecting this question that was most likely going to be asked, so he came prepared with it, but I don't know. He had this whole slide prepared without no pop up. It's a little sketchy.
Let me show you a quote from him, because this quote is very right on the money. He wrote the book Misquoting Jesus. I don't know if you've heard of this book, but in 2005 he wrote a book called Misquoting Jesus, a popular book in which he tries to insinuate that we can't trust what the New Testament documents have said. Yet the very same year 2005, he wrote an academic work. He updated an academic work with his mentor, Dr. Bruce Metzger from Princeton University. In fact, Metzger was the top manuscript scholar of the last century.
Get on with it,
And
man.
in that book, he agrees with Metzger that the New Testament documents are copied accurately. Now, why is...
But that's not the point. It doesn't matter if they're copied accurately from what. Now, I'll agree with Ehrman and apparently Frank Turek that from the newest copies, doesn't matter if it says, like, you take his copy 1, copy 2, if there was a letter missing here, or it doesn't really matter. For a book that's supposed to be inerrant, it kind of does matter. But let's just say, it doesn't matter. But we don't have the original to know if the copy is correct. We can know if a copy of a copy is terrible and correct, but it doesn't matter if we don't know what the original said. Apparently destroying it is...
Is he coming to two different conclusions the same year? Same evidence. The only thing I can speculate is when you say to the academic community something wrong, they'll correct you on it. But when you say something wrong to the lay community, they don't know any better in most cases. You can sell a lot of books when you say the New Testament documents aren't copied reliably. That gets you a review in the New York Times, that gets you on the Colbert Show, the Jon Stewart Show. You sell a lot of books. Right, what's that?
A textbook to be studied. We're studying Ehrman now.
You're studying Misquoting Jesus?
No, his textbook, the New Testament.
Okay, well, that one that he co-wrote with Metzger is actually good. But this one, now here's what he says. This is in the appendix of the paperback version, so this comes out a year or two later from the original Misquoting Jesus. He's interviewed, and in the interview, here's what he says. Check this out. This is a quote from the book, page 252. He says, Bruce Metzger is one of the great scholars of modern times, and I dedicated the book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in the field. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him, and even though we may disagree on important religious questions, he is a firmly committed Christian and I am not. We are in complete agreement on a number of very important historical and textual questions. What are they in agreement on? If he and I were put into a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands. The position I argue for in Misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. Well, why would you write Misquoting Jesus then? Not you, but Bart Ehrman, right? The book maybe should be called Misquoting Ehrman because he doesn't even agree with himself. Dude. So it seems that even Ehrman, when push comes to shove...
This is great for Dr. Bart Ehrman, who I know that he doesn't particularly care about the thousands of discrepancies between copies and translations. I know he doesn't care about it, but can we get away from what one person has to say about this topic? He's sidestepping here. He's deflecting a little bit. Go back to how do we account for errors in the Bible to the original. We don't have the original, or the irreconcilable differences in the stories that are in the Bible itself. Some of the stories are told completely different ways. There's more than errors than like spelling error. And you writing the word just, if you miss the letter U, there's more errors than that. Get into those. I guess the video or the question that was asked was, how do you reconcile the discrepancies between the scribes' translations? But it's not very important. He definitely was prepared to answer this. Now, if you look up at the top here, it says Ehrman agrees that the text is reliable, but he's misquoting Bart, because when you say that this is reliable, he doesn't say that Ehrman agrees that the New Testament text is copied reliably. He says that it is reliable. Urban does not agree that this is reliable. He points out all kinds of variations in stories, some of them irreconcilable. Um, it's just a weird way to phrase that. But what does this have to do with errors in the Bible? This is just, I mean, go on the defense for yourself. Don't deflect to Dr. Bart Ehrman, who, I mean, the guy does really good work.
Admits that we do have an accurate copy of the New Testament documents. Now, your second question is, how do we know verbatim what Jesus said? We might not know verbatim what he said because there are no quote marks in Greek, so we're not always sure exactly if it's a quote or if it is a paraphrase. Because Jesus probably spoke in Aramaic, yet the documents are written in Greek. But that's okay. You can communicate truth in different languages, and you don't have to be exact with what he said. You can get the gist of it. In fact, Jesus said, he was an itinerant preacher. He probably gave the same talks in several different...
But if you don't have the originals to compare it to, so let's just say that we did have the original. Let's just say that it was written down. The earliest, it's not like there was a person with a pen and a paper at the Sermon on the Mount writing down what Jesus was saying. The earliest copies of the New Testament still be decades after Jesus said those words. So even if they were written by the names attributed, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, even if they were actually written by Matthew, Mark, and John, it still wouldn't have been until decades after Jesus had said these things. So we're already starting off with somebody trying to pull from memory 20 years ago what somebody had said, which is a problem in itself. But we don't even have something that is that old to compare our current translations to. So we're going from something that I'm trying to remember that somebody had said 20 years ago. I'm going to write that down. And then people are going to take that and they're going to copy it and they're going to copy it and they're going to copy it and they're going to copy it. So even if it was reliable from the original copies, still going off of what somebody's memory of what somebody said. You could say anything you want. You could say Jesus, 20 years ago Jesus said this, this, and this. So I mean, it's irreconcilable to me.
Different places, right? I mean, if you followed me around, I go around to different campuses. I give the same presentations over and over again, but I might say things slightly differently in one place than another place. So,
but you're not a God.
One guy heard it one
You're
way,
not
another
Jesus.
guy heard it another way. We have the gist of what Jesus said.
I would hope Jesus could do a little bit better than Frank Turek.
And that's really all God wanted to tell us. Also, you might imagine that at those times, people had highly developed memories. They could memorize complete books. We can't even remember our phone number because we have all these devices that remember it all for us. So these people were an oral culture, and they memorized things quite well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, they were an oral culture, which means that they passed down stories. So the story of Jesus was told from one person to the next. We all know how reliable that can be. Come on, man.
Thank you, Grace.
All right, well, we're done. So errors in the Bible, just go through and you can look yourself what errors are in the Bible that are irreconcilable. I mean, some of the stories are just wildly different. They're just told in completely different ways. And this is a book that's supposed to be inerrant. So can we know that translations from maybe 300 years after Jesus died are pretty close to the one that was written 300 years after Jesus died? Probably. Do minor discrepancies matter? Not really, unless you think the Bible then errors in it. So, but overall, we don't have the original copies, and even if we did have the first copy of the New Testament, and by gets a little more complicated than that because there were many books that were written at the time. So it's not like there was a book of the New Testament that was written as book 1 and then book 2 came out. These were just stories that were written down at the time. And then what made it into the New Testament was put in there much later. A lot of stuff didn't make the cut. But even if you did have the very first story that was written down, let's say the Gospel of Mark, just say we had that original copy, it would still be going off of, and also we just assume that Mark is the one who wrote it, which we don't even know that. But let's just assume that Mark wrote it. Let's assume we had the first one. You're still going off of what Mark could remember from decades ago. You could literally write anything in there that you wanted to. It's just my thoughts on it. Yet another video I think of wholly unimpressive.